The snow falls heavily, blanketing the hospital parking lot as a German shepherd sits silently, his fur matted with cold, his eyes searching the entrance. He doesn't flinch as the wind cuts through the frozen air, nor does he seem to notice the people rushing past, heads down, focused on their own hurried lives. His body is a frozen statue, but his eyes, those piercing brown eyes, never leave the hospital's door. It's almost as if the world around him ceases to exist. He's waiting. But for who? The stillness of the night presses down on him like a heavy weight, yet he refuses to move. Not even the bitter cold can make him abandon his post. The waiting, the longing, are all consuming. Emily pulls into the hospital parking lot, her breath fogging up in the cold. Her tired eyes scan the area, and that's when she sees him again, the dog. She's noticed him a few times before, perched by the entrance like a silent sentinel, but today there's something different about him. His coat is covered in snow, and his gaze is fixed. He doesn't move, doesn't even react to the cars passing by. Emily's heart tugs as she grabs her bag from the passenger seat. She's seen a lot in her years as a nurse, but something about this dog strikes a chord deep within her. His loyalty is evident, but what is he waiting for? Who does he belong to? The dog doesn't blink, doesn't take his eyes off the hospital. His quiet vigil is almost haunting. The days pass, and every time Emily arrives at the hospital, the dog is still there, waiting, staring at the door. There's no one else outside, just him, alone in the freezing cold. She begins to wonder why he's so determined to stay. Doesn't he need warmth, food, shelter? He doesn't show any signs of moving, no matter how long the shift or how harsh the weather becomes. Emily can't shake the feeling that there's something more to his presence, something deeper than just a stray dog caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The way he looks at the hospital, it's as if he's waiting for someone important. As the days go on, Emily feels an unease stirring within her. There's something urgent, something unspoken in the way he watches the door. What is it that's keeping him there? Emily can't let it go. She starts asking around, casually, during breaks or while helping patients. A few nurses shrug, saying it's nothing more than a stray who's taken up residence. But there's one nurse, an older woman named Karen, who seems to know more. That dog, Karen says, lowering her voice, belongs to a patient here, a man who's been in a coma for days. The dog comes every morning, right at dawn, and he stays until nightfall. He hasn't left once. Emily's heart skips a beat. She didn't know this, didn't know that the dog was waiting for someone inside. Now, everything feels different. The dog's persistence is no longer just loyalty. It's devotion. He's waiting for his owner, not just a man, but someone who holds his heart. Emily wonders how long he's been out here, how long he's endured the cold, and she feels a sudden pull to find out more. The hospital is a place where physical healing happens. Doctors work tirelessly, machines hum, and nurses care for the broken bodies of patients. But Emily knows that healing isn't just about the body. She's seen patients recover from surgeries and ailments, but still carry scars, emotional ones that no doctor can fix. As Emily walks past the dog one morning, she notices his eyes again. There's a softness to them, a sadness mixed with hope, like he's waiting for something to bring him peace. It strikes her then that this dog, in his silent vigil, is undergoing his own kind of healing, just as she is. She's been closed off, focused only on her work, but something about the dog's loyalty makes her reconsider. Maybe, just maybe, this journey of waiting, of devotion, isn't just for the dog. She feels an emotional shift within herself, a desire to understand and help, not just the patients she cares for, but this animal who's teaching her what it means to wait with love, to heal with loyalty, to trust again. The wind howled, sending icy gusts through the hospital parking lot, where Emily paused, her heart heavy with a mix of concern and hesitation. Her shift had just ended, and as usual Max was sitting there, silent, unmoving, but ever present. She knew she couldn't ignore him any longer. Her footsteps were slow, tentative, as if the world around her had paused for this moment. She knelt down, extending her hand toward the dog, her pulse quickening. Max's eyes, though tired and wary, locked onto hers. She could feel the weight of his sorrow, the years of loyalty etched into every line of his fur. Her hand hovered, just inches from his muzzle. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she waited, unsure of how to bridge the invisible gap between them. There was a quiet tension, the kind that comes with the unknown. What was he feeling? What had brought him to this point of stillness? Max didn't move at first. His tail, usually so full of energy, barely twitched. He simply watched her with a deep, knowing gaze. She felt her heart ache. She couldn't help but be drawn to him, despite the uncertainty of what might come next. He was here for a reason, and she was sure he wasn't going to leave any time soon. Max's tail gave a faint wag, almost imperceptible in the wind, but his eyes, they spoke volumes. His gaze was not frantic, not desperate. It was quiet, filled with a sadness that seemed to ripple through Emily's chest. Max didn't bark. He didn't jump up excitedly or rush forward. No, instead, he just sat there, still, unwavering, staring at her with a quiet intensity that pierced through the cold evening air. There was something about the way he watched her. Something heavy, something that spoke of loss, of longing, and of devotion so deep it transcended words. Emily's breath hitched. She wasn't sure if Max was waiting for her to make the first move, or if he was simply resigned to his place in the world. Yet, in his eyes she saw a glimmer of hope, as if he believed, just for a moment, that she might be the one to help him. She swallowed, unsure of what to do next, but certain that the bond between them had already begun to form. As Emily sat beside him, lost in the moment, a passer-by, an elderly man wrapped in a thick coat, stopped in front of her. His gaze lingered on Max, and then, with a knowing sigh, he began to speak. "That dog," the man said, his voice thick with compassion. "His name's Max. He's been here every day for weeks now. Never leaves, doesn't bark, doesn't beg, just watch the door." Emily's curiosity piqued. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. The man looked at her, his face weary, almost sad. His owner, a soldier he was, came in here after an injury. Big one, I think. Been here ever since. Max won't leave the entrance. He's waiting. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Max wasn't just a stray. He had a person. Someone who had given him a life, a bond. But now that person is gone, or so it seemed. She could feel the pull of the story, the unspoken bond between the dog and the man who had once been his world. Max had been waiting, not for food, not for attention, but for something far greater. His human. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Emily couldn't shake the image of Max's silent vigil. She learned from the nurses that the soldier's name was William. He had been admitted after a traumatic injury, his body battered, his spirit broken. But Max? Max had been there from the very beginning, refusing to leave the hospital's front steps, as if tethered to something he couldn't abandon. Emily's heart ached. She had seen the bond between humans and animals before, but this was something else. It was loyalty forged through hardship, through battle, through a lifetime of shared experiences. William and Max had survived together, and now Max was unwilling to face life without him. The more Emily learned, the more she understood the depth of Max's devotion. He had been abandoned in a way, but not by choice. He was simply waiting, holding on to the hope that his human would return. Emily could see the toll it was taking on him. His fur was matted with snow, his eyes dull from the cold and fatigue. But still, he sat. Still, he waited. Emily stood at the hospital entrance staring at Max. The decision weighed heavily on her chest. As a nurse, she knew the toll the cold was taking on him. His body was trembling, not from excitement, but from the biting chill of winter. His health was deteriorating, and no one had the heart to tell him to leave. Yet, Emily couldn't bring herself to intervene. There was something deeply instinctual in her connection to Max, something that reached beyond reason. She had seen it in the eyes of every patient she had cared for, that silent plea for companionship, for care, for a spark of hope. And Max, despite the cold and the quiet suffering, had given that plea to her. Should she help? Should she bring him inside, where warmth and safety awaited him? Or should she respect his vigil, his unspoken promise to stay by William's side? Her heart ached as she gazed down at Max, torn between her professional instincts and the raw emotion that had tied her to him. She couldn't let him suffer, not when he was so close to breaking. Determined to uncover more, Emily made a choice. She would visit Max every day, bringing him food, offering him warmth, and slowly unraveling the mystery of his unshakable loyalty. Each visit felt like a new chapter in their shared journey, and with every moment the bond between them deepened. She learned more about William's injuries, about the way the soldier had once cared for Max, and how their relationship had been one of survival and unspoken love. And through these small acts of kindness, feeding him, offering him comfort, Emily began to understand that this wasn't just a simple rescue mission. It was a call for her to help, to restore something that had been lost, and to offer a piece of herself to a dog who had given his all for a human he could not forget. Every day she returned to Max. Her curiosity about William grew. But the deeper connection that formed between her and Max was undeniable. He wasn't just waiting for his owner anymore. He had started waiting for her too. Emily walked into the hospital courtyard, feeling the chill of the early morning air as she approached Max. His fur was matted with the remnants of snow, his body stiff from the cold. He looked at her with eyes full of uncertainty, his gaze intense yet distant, as if unsure whether he could trust her. Emily's heart ached for him. She crouched down slowly, ensuring she didn't make any sudden movements. Gently, she placed a small toy in front of him, a squeaky ball brightly colored to catch his attention. She spoke softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's okay, Max. I won't hurt you." Max's ears twitched, but he didn't move. His eyes never left her, studying her every motion, as if deciding whether she was friend or foe. Emily sat there for a long while, offering the toy but never forcing the interaction. Eventually, Max stood up, sniffed the ball, and then slowly backed away, his tail still tucked beneath him. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step. Emily smiled softly, her heart swelling with compassion. "He'll come around," she whispered to herself, her voice full of quiet resolve. Days passed, and Emily continued her visits, each one marked by patience and small gestures of kindness. She brought more toys, treats, and, most importantly, her calm presence. Slowly, Max began to show signs of trust. One evening, after a long day of work, Emily sat down on the grass beside him. She didn't try to coax him into coming closer. Instead, she simply sat there, watching him. Max approached cautiously, his eyes still wary, but his body language less tense. He sat down a few feet away, his gaze softening as he studied her. Without thinking, Emily reached out a hand, letting it hover just above his head. Max looked at it for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he lowered his head and allowed her fingers to gently stroke his fur. She could feel the slight tremor in his body, the remnants of his fear, but he didn't pull away. In that simple act of contact, Emily could feel the weight of all the unspoken words between them. She continued to stroke his fur, moving in slow, deliberate motions. Max's eyes closed, his head resting more fully in her lap as she ran her hand down his back. The warmth between them was undeniable. For the first time, Emily felt the quiet stirrings of a bond, something fragile, yet real. As the days turned into weeks, Emily found herself drawn to Max more than ever. She couldn't explain it. Perhaps it was the loneliness she felt within herself, or perhaps it was the bond they were slowly weaving together. There were nights when she sat beside him, talking to him softly as he rested his head on her lap. She shared her thoughts, her frustrations, the moments of doubt that clung to her like shadows. "I just don't know what to do anymore," she confessed one evening, her voice heavy with the weight of her own heartache. "I give everything at work, but there's always something missing." Max lifted his head slightly, his eyes searching hers, and for a moment she felt as though he understood that she too was healing in her own way. He nudged her hand with his nose, as if offering a silent comfort. In those quiet moments, Emily's soul felt lighter, her burdens less oppressive. She didn't need to explain everything to Max. He was simply there, a steady presence in her life. The first time Max let her comfort him in a moment of fear, Emily's heart nearly broke. One of the hospital's loud machines began to beep, its noise echoing through the courtyard. Max's body stiffened, his eyes wide with panic. Without thinking, he bolted, running towards the far corner of the yard, his paws scrambling against the ground. Emily followed him quickly, calling out softly, "Max, it's okay, I'm here." She reached him just as he pressed himself against the corner, his tail tucked low, his eyes frantic. Gently, she kneeled beside him, extending her hand slowly. "Max, it's all right. I'm not going to let anything hurt you." It took a few moments, but gradually Max's tremors slowed. Slowly, ever so slowly, he leaned into her touch. His body relaxed, the tension in his muscles fading as Emily stroked him with the same calm reassurance she had used every time before. She didn't rush him, just remained there beside him, her fingers gently working through his fur. At that moment, Max didn't flinch. He trusted her. But even as their bond deepened, Emily couldn't escape the growing internal conflict she felt. Her responsibilities at the hospital weighed heavily on her. She was a nurse, a caregiver, and yet here she was drawn so deeply to a dog that was in desperate need of help. She often found herself torn between her professional duties and the desire to be there for Max. Each time she left him at the end of her shift, it felt like a small piece of her heart stayed behind. One evening, after a particularly exhausting shift, Emily stood at the doorway of the hospital, staring out at the darkened courtyard. She could see Max sitting near the corner, waiting for her. Her heart wrenched in her chest. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, the guilt creeping into her voice. "I have work to do. I can't keep running to you." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. She had to help Max. It wasn't just about the dog, it was about her too. About finding something real to hold on to in a world that often felt too chaotic. With a deep breath, she turned and walked back outside to him, the weight of her doubts momentarily lifted by the certainty in her heart. Despite their growing bond, Max was not without his struggles. Some days, the past he carried was too much to bear. Emily began to notice how certain sounds, the beeping of machines, the sudden arrival of unfamiliar people, would trigger something in Max, pulling him back to the fear and trauma he had known before. One afternoon, as she approached him, a loud siren blared from a nearby emergency vehicle. Max's ears flattened, and before Emily could react, he was up and bolting toward the gate, panic flashing in his eyes. "Max, no!" Emily shouted, rushing to follow. She found him hiding in a corner again, trembling violently, his eyes wide and filled with terror. It hurt to see him like this, so far removed from the calm moments they had shared, but Emily understood. She couldn't force him to heal on her timeline. She knelt down beside him, offering her presence without trying to push him. "It's okay, Max," she whispered softly. "I'm here. I won't let you face this alone." As she spoke, she could feel his body relax under her gentle touch, his trembling slowly subsiding. The fear didn't vanish, but with Emily's steady presence, he learned to trust that not all sounds were dangerous. Max's setbacks were challenging, but Emily remained patient. There were days when he would retreat into his own world, shutting himself off from her. But she never gave up. She continued to visit, continued to speak to him gently, and continued to offer him comfort. One day, after Max had run from a trigger, Emily chased after him until she found him hiding beneath a nearby bench. She didn't demand that he come out or make him face the world on her terms. Instead, she sat beside the bench, letting him come to her when he was ready, and slowly he did. Max stepped out from his hiding spot, his eyes full of wariness, but there was something more there, something that hadn't been there before. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly, and Max, for the first time, sat beside her without retreating. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. Weeks passed, and their connection only grew stronger. Emily found herself healing too, her heart becoming lighter as she spent more time with Max. He was no longer just a dog she took care of. He was a companion who filled a void she hadn't known existed. As she knelt beside him one evening, gently running her hand through his fur, she realized that in giving so much to Max, she had begun to heal her own wounds. The pain she had carried with her for so long, the loneliness, was starting to fade. Max had become more than just a symbol of loyalty. He was her anchor, her companion, her source of peace. But as Emily's bond with Max deepened, so did her curiosity about the mystery of his past. Why hadn't his owner returned? What had happened to him? Emily began to dig deeper, speaking to hospital staff and the occasional passerby who had seen Max waiting outside day after day. What she learned only deepened the mystery. His owner, a soldier, had been severely injured in an accident. After the injury, he was admitted to the hospital, but no one had seen him since. Max had remained at the hospital ever since, waiting for someone who might never come back. Emily's heart broke for Max's unwavering loyalty, and as she continued to visit him, the need to uncover the truth behind his past became more pressing. She owed it to Max to understand what had happened, and perhaps help him find peace. Max was nowhere to be found. Emily's heart sank as she scoured every corner of the hospital, moving from room to room, calling out his name in panic. She had grown accustomed to his steady presence, his soft breathing at her feet, his comforting gaze as he lay beside her during long shifts. But now, silence greeted her in the usual places he would rest. Her thoughts raced, her body trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. Could something have happened to him? Had he wandered off? Her mind spun, frantically trying to recall if she had seen him earlier. She retraced her steps, walking faster, her hands shaking as she checked the back rooms and hallways. No sign of Max. The dread in her chest deepened, tightening her throat. She felt an overwhelming sensation of loss, as if the world had suddenly tilted off balance. A tear slid down her cheek as she called out again, hoping, praying that he would appear, tail wagging, with that ever-hopeful look in his eyes, but nothing. Where could he be? The question echoed in her mind as her feet carried her faster through the halls, her breath shallow and erratic. A gnawing sense of panic began to creep into her every thought. Something terrible had happened. She had to find him. The nurse at the front desk gave Emily a sympathetic look, her voice low as she relayed the news. Max was taken by the authorities this morning. They found him wandering around the back lot and assumed he was a stray. Emily felt as though the world had shifted beneath her feet. "What?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're saying you let them take him?" "They didn't have a choice, Emily," the nurse said gently, but her words only made the fear inside Emily swell. "The hospital's policy on animals, well, we have to follow it. He's at risk of being put down if no one claims him." The words hit like a slap. Max, the loyal companion who had been by her side through every sleepless night, every challenging shift, now faced an uncertain fate, possibly death, because of hospital policy. Emily's knees threatened to buckle as the weight of the situation crushed her. "I can't let this happen," she thought. The thought of losing him, of never seeing that familiar, trusting look in his eyes again, made her feel as though her heart was breaking. Her hands clenched into fists. "Where is he?" she demanded, fighting the tears that burned behind her eyes. "I need to see him. I have to fix this." Desperation flooded Emily's every action as she rushed to the local authorities, her words tumbling out in a desperate plea. "Please, you don't understand. Max isn't just any dog. He's my dog. He's part of my life, part of my healing." But the officer was unmoved, his expression unreadable as he glanced at the paperwork in front of him. "The policy is clear. No pets allowed in the hospital, especially strays. He'll be put down if no one claims him soon." Emily's throat constricted with helplessness, her voice a whisper as she fought to hold back tears. "You can't do this. He's not a stray. He's mine. He's been with me through everything. He's been my rock." The officer didn't flinch. "I understand, ma'am, but the law is the law." Every word felt like a knife in her heart. The bureaucracy of it all, the cold indifference, it shattered her. She had given Max love and care, but that didn't seem to matter. She was just another person, pleading for a life that no one else seemed to care about. Her hands shook as she turned away. What am I supposed to do? With her heart heavy and her thoughts in turmoil, Emily made her way to the military hospital. The sterile, emotionless halls felt like a stark contrast to the warmth she had shared with Max. The hum of fluorescent lights seemed to amplify her inner anxiety as she moved through the corridors, following the directions given to her. She was directed to a small office where a kind, elderly officer sat. The moment she spoke about Max, the officer's expression darkened. "You don't know?" he asked. Max was with Lieutenant Jackson Hayes. He was his service dog. Emily's eyes widened in confusion. "Jackson Hayes, the soldier? What happened to him?" The officer looked at her with a mix of sympathy and regret. "Lieutenant Hayes was critically injured in a mission. He's in a coma. And as far as I know, there's no one else in his family to claim Max." The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. Max's loyalty, his bond with Jackson, was deeper than she had ever known. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about him too. And the truth was, Jackson may never wake up. Her mind raced as the officer gave her more details. The situation was far more complex than she had imagined, but Emily couldn't stop now. Max needed her. He always had. Inside the dimly lit military hospital room, the smell of antiseptic stung her nose as Emily stood beside Lieutenant Hayes's bed. She had expected to find a young, vibrant soldier, but instead she saw a man on life support, his body pale and still, hooked up to machines that beeped in monotony. The officer had told her that Jackson had no family. His injuries were severe, and his prognosis was grim. There were no promises of recovery, no guarantees that he would ever wake up. Emily's stomach churned as she absorbed the gravity of the situation. Her thoughts swirled. Max has been loyal to this man through it all. But what happens if Jackson doesn't survive? What happens to Max? She couldn't shake the thought. Max's bond to Jackson was undeniable, but the truth of the situation hit her with an intensity she hadn't prepared for. Jackson's fate wasn't just uncertain, it was a life-altering complication in her decision to save Max. But one thing remained clear. Max needed her now, more than ever. Emily's heart was torn between two forces. Her desire to help Max, to save him from the cold, bureaucratic system, and the overwhelming sense of responsibility she felt toward Jackson. If she broke the rules to save Max, would she be betraying the man who had saved so many others? And if she didn't act, would she be allowing both Max and Jackson to suffer in silence? The dilemma twisted in her gut. She loved Max. He had been by her side through every tear, every triumph. But Jackson had given so much, and his sacrifice weighed heavily on her conscience. Her hands trembled as she sat by the hospital bed, Max's image etched in her mind. This is not just about me anymore. This is about doing what's right for them both. Her gaze fell to the floor. Emily didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let Max go without a fight. He had been her support, her companion, her lifeline. She owed him that. It took a long night of reflection, of pacing the sterile hospital halls, but Emily finally made her decision. The hospital's policies, the system, it didn't matter anymore. Max needed her, and she wouldn't let him suffer in the cold, uncaring hands of bureaucracy. Her mind was clear as she stood up, her resolve hardening like steel. She wasn't just fighting for Max anymore. She was fighting for their bond, for the unconditional love they had shared. She had to give him a chance to heal, just like she had healed because of him. With determination in her step, she returned to the authorities. She wouldn't plead this time. She would demand. She would explain the depth of the connection between her and Max, and how that bond wasn't just emotional, but life-saving. She knew the risks. Breaking the rules could cost her job, could cost her everything. But she couldn't live with herself if she didn't at least try. Max had saved her in ways she couldn't even begin to describe, and now it was her turn to save him. Emily stood before the board of directors, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "I understand the rules," she began, "but I'm asking you to reconsider. Max isn't just a dog, he's a lifeline. He's been with me through the darkest moments, and I know he has the power to heal. But if you let him go, he'll never have that chance." The faces before her remained unreadable, their stern expressions betraying no hint of mercy. One of the doctors spoke up, his tone cold. "We can't make exceptions, Emily. It's not just about Max, it's about hospital policy." But Emily wasn't backing down. Her voice grew stronger as she pressed on, her words tinged with raw emotion. "Max deserves a chance. We all do." The room was silent. It was a tense standoff, one where Emily's heart raced in her chest. She wasn't sure if she would win, but one thing was certain. She would never stop fighting for Max. Emily finally persuades the hospital authorities to allow Max to return under special circumstances, promising that his presence will aid Jackson's recovery. Emily stood before the hospital's administration office, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of the decision hanging in the air. She had fought tirelessly, making one appeal after another, each time more desperate than the last. "Max is more than a dog," she repeated, her voice steady despite the fire burning in her chest. "He's Jackson's lifeline. You don't understand. It's not just about rules, it's about survival." The head nurse, her face a mask of doubt, looked down at the papers in her hand, then back at Emily. "We don't usually make exceptions," she said, but there was a shift in her tone. Emily's persistence had worn her down. After what seemed like an eternity, the nurse finally nodded. "Under special circumstances, we'll make an exception. Max can return, but it's your responsibility, Emily. If anything goes wrong, it's on you." Emily's heart pounded, but she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, and turned quickly, unable to hold back the rush of emotion flooding her chest. It wasn't just a victory. It was the hope she'd clung to for so long, now finally within her grasp. Max settles beside Jackson's bed, his presence comforting and familiar. Despite Jackson's unconscious state, there's an undeniable sense of peace in the room. The door to the ICU opened, and Max trotted in, his eyes scanning the room before they landed on Jackson. His tail, still a little stiff, wagged once before he padded over to the side of the bed. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the faint hum of medical machines filled the air, but none of it could penetrate the quiet, profound connection in that room. Max laid down beside Jackson's bed, his body curling protectively at the man's feet. Even though Jackson was still unconscious, there was something in the way the dog settled in, his silent, watchful presence, that brought an air of peace to the sterile environment. Emily stood at the door, her heart swelling as she watched the two beings she loved most in the world. The doctors had told her not to expect miracles. Jackson was critically injured, his recovery uncertain. But now, with Max by his side, there was a stillness, an unspoken understanding between the man and his dog, as if their hearts were beating in sync despite the silence of the room. Jackson's hand twitches, and his breathing steadies as Max lays by his side, signaling the beginning of his slow recovery. Days passed. Emily continued to visit, but always in quiet observation. Max never left Jackson's side. He lay next to him through the nights, only getting up when Emily brought him food or water, then returning to his post. One afternoon, as Emily sat by Jackson's bedside, she noticed a subtle change. His fingers, once limp, twitched. A slight flutter. It was nothing drastic, nothing more than a hint, but Emily's breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward, watching, waiting, and then another twitch, this time more deliberate. Jackson's breathing, shallow and labored for days, seemed to ease, deepening in a way that felt almost natural. Emily's heart raced. Max didn't seem to notice, his gaze never leaving Jackson's face, but Emily knew something was happening. Max's presence was working its magic. Days pass and Jackson finally wakes up, his first sight being Max's loyal face. The reunion is an emotional moment, filled with gratitude and relief. It was early morning when Jackson's eyelids fluttered, struggling to open against the weight of exhaustion and pain. For a long moment, he lay still, blinking into the harsh hospital lights. Then, as if his body had heard the unspoken call, his eyes focused on the familiar shape curled by his feet. Maximum. His breath hitched and his hand twitched, this time not from pain, but from a need to reach out. His fingers barely grazed Max's fur, but the dog was already there, his head lifting, eyes bright with recognition and affection. Jackson's voice cracked as he whispered, "Max?" The sound of his own voice, foreign and weak, only seemed to deepen the raw emotion that surged through him. Max's tail thudded against the floor, his whole body wiggling in joyful response. Emily stood behind him, tears streaming down her face as she watched the reunion unfold. The bond between them, once fractured by distance and tragedy, was now whole again, unstoppable and undeniable. With Max by his side, Jackson's recovery speeds up. His strength grows with each passing day, and his bond with Max deepens, symbolizing the power of companionship. The weeks that followed were marked by small victories. Jackson's condition, once dire, began to improve steadily. He moved from the ICU to a private room, then began physical therapy with a determination he'd never known before. But it wasn't the physical strength alone that drove his recovery. It was Max, always there, lying beside him, offering silent comfort and unwavering loyalty. Jackson could feel it. Feel the pull of Max's presence, the way it kept him grounded in reality, reminding him there was something worth fighting for. Each morning, Jackson would wake to the feeling of Max's warm body pressed against his side, a comfort that no medication could replicate. Every time Jackson took a step, Max was there, nudging him forward, encouraging him with quiet trust. Together, they faced each day as a team. As Jackson recovers and Max thrives, Emily undergoes her own transformation. Her once lonely existence is now filled with purpose as she watches the powerful bond between Jackson and Max. In the quiet moments when Emily wasn't tending to her responsibilities at the hospital, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed. When she'd first arrived at the hospital, the loneliness had consumed her. She had only Max to keep her company, and even that had been a struggle at times. But now, watching Jackson and Max together, Emily felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. It wasn't just the recovery of Jackson that had transformed her life. It was the love, the bond between the soldier and the dog. She had witnessed a miracle of sorts, something that transcended the hospital walls and the sterile machines. It had filled her heart with a sense of purpose she hadn't realized was missing. Max, Jackson, and Emily together become a living testament to resilience, loyalty, and the power of unconditional love, symbolizing the healing potential of their unbreakable bond. As Jackson continued to heal, the trio became inseparable. Their bond, one of unwavering loyalty and love, became a beacon of hope for those around them. Max, once just a dog, had become an integral part of their lives, his presence symbolic of the unbreakable strength that defined their bond. The story of Max and Jackson, and Emily too, was told in whispers and smiles, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, love had the power to heal. Together, they embodied the resilience of the human spirit, the power of companionship, and the truth that sometimes the most unlikely heroes come in the form of a loyal dog and the heart of a soldier. Max sat by Jackson's bedside, his golden eyes unwavering as he watched over the man who had once been his protector. His fur was matted with the remnants of days spent by Jackson's side, but to him, the bond they shared was unbreakable. Even when Jackson's world had crumbled, Max had remained there, steadfast, unwavering in his loyalty. The doctors had told Emily that Jackson's chances of recovery were slim, that his body was too battered from the accident to heal fully. But Max didn't care about prognosis or medical terms. He cared only about being there for Jackson. Max's loyalty became a beacon of hope, a quiet promise that no matter how dark the days, he would never leave Jackson's side. And it was in those moments when all seemed lost that Max's presence began to make a difference. The love he radiated was like a quiet force, slowly seeping into Jackson's unconscious state, reminding him of the power of unconditional love. Max, though just a dog, showed the true depth of what loyalty could do, not just to a person but to a heart so broken it had forgotten how to heal. Emily watched the scene unfold from the corner of the room, feeling a deep warmth in her chest. Max's devotion to Jackson was palpable, and as she observed it, she couldn't help but see how it mirrored her own journey. She had been closed off for so long, afraid to open herself to anyone after years of heartache. But here, in the presence of this dog and his unwavering commitment, Emily began to understand what true healing meant. Max's emotional bond with Jackson had begun as a simple need for companionship, but over time it had grown into something far greater, a source of emotional sustenance. Emily realized that healing was more than just physical recovery. It was the restoration of trust, of opening one's heart to love once again. And if Max, this humble creature, could offer such an immense gift to Jackson, why couldn't she do the same for herself? Through Max's unwavering loyalty, Emily learned that emotional healing required letting go of past wounds and embracing the power of the new connections. Love wasn't just about saving someone from their struggles. It was about helping them find the strength to stand tall again, piece by piece. Emily's heart swelled with a quiet revelation as she watched Jackson's fingers twitch slightly, the first sign of life since the accident. Max was still lying beside him, watching, waiting, never straying far from Jackson's side. The days since she had fought for Max's return to Jackson had been long and full of uncertainty. But now, as she witnessed the slow progress, she knew she had made the right decision. In that moment, she realized how transformative second chances could be. It wasn't just about Jackson. This was about herself too. Emily had been hesitant at first, unsure if bringing Max back into the fold would truly make a difference. But now, as the bond between Max and Jackson grew stronger, she saw that second chances were the cornerstone of healing. They were a gift, a chance for something beautiful to bloom in the midst of pain. Emily had trusted in Max's love to help Jackson heal, but in doing so, she had also given herself the opportunity to heal, to trust again, and that, she knew, was a lesson that would stay with her forever. The quiet moments between Max, Jackson, and Emily spoke volumes. Max's gentle presence by Jackson's side was not just about loyalty, it was about compassion, a force that held them all together. As Jackson continued to regain his strength, Emily found herself more and more drawn into their world, where love and understanding flowed freely. In the room, there was no need for words to express the depth of what was happening. The compassion shared between the three of them was the glue that held their connection together. It wasn't a loud, forceful thing. It was something more subtle, something unspoken but understood. Whether it was the way Max nuzzled against Jackson's hand, or the way Emily stayed close by, watching both of them, their hearts were bound by an invisible thread of care. That compassion wasn't something that could be explained easily. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the small, quiet acts of love that built a foundation strong enough to weather anything life might throw their way. As the days turned into weeks, and Jackson's strength slowly returned, it became clear that the bond between him, Emily, and Max was no ordinary one. It was something rare and powerful, forged through hardship, trust, and unconditional love. And in this small, quiet room, surrounded by the simple presence of a dog, Emily realized the most important lesson of all. Love, whether between a human and another human, or between a human and an animal, had the power to heal. It was a universal truth, one that transcends all barriers, all wounds, and all fears. Love could mend broken hearts, heal shattered souls, and restore hope where there was none. It had the power to bring light to the darkest corners of the world, to give people and animals alike the strength to keep going when everything seemed impossible. As Emily looked at Max, at Jackson, and at their bond, she knew that the love they shared wasn't just a source of comfort. It was a transformative force. And that, she realized, was the most powerful truth of all. Love heals, always and without fail, and